Imagine, imagine breaking your arm. You know, you go to the hospital, they take an X-ray, and it shows that jagged white line.
Right, it's incredibly obvious.
Yeah, exactly. The doctor points to it, and you have your answer. It's totally binary. It's broken or it's not broken.
Hmm.
And, well, it's comforting in a way because we naturally crave a world where problems are visible.
Where they're quantifiable.
Exactly. Easily categorized. But what happens when you try to take an X-ray of society's moral fabric?
Well, the machine breaks down.
It completely breaks down. I mean, you look at the state of the world today, the systemic fraud, the extortion, the, exploitation of the vulnerable, and you see this seemingly unchecked arrogance of bad actors who just keep winning.
Yeah, they just never seem to face consequences.
Right, and you find yourself staring at this diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky. It's a universal tension. You end up asking, why do the bad guys keep getting away with it? And frankly, where exactly is God in all this?
I mean, it is the ultimate collision between the expectation of divine justice and the brutal reality of human history.
Yeah.
Every thinking person who holds to any concept of an ultimate moral order eventually hits that wall.
Well, welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we are taking a deep dive into that exact collision. But our source material for this exploration isn't, a modern sociological study or some recent political op-ed.
No, we're going much further back.
Way back. We're examining an incredibly profound, deeply analytical text from the 16th century. Specifically, we're looking at excerpts from John Calvin's commentary on Psalm 10.
And it's a text that functions perfectly as a mirror for our own era. I mean, the anxieties Calvin unpacks regarding systemic corruption and the psychological profile of what he calls the prosperous wicked, they haven't aged a day.
Not one bit.
Because the baseline machinery of human nature, it just remains entirely static.
So our mission today is to dissect that machinery. We want to understand the exact psychology of the oppressor, right? And examine why justice is structurally and seemingly purposefully delayed.
And ideally, discover how to navigate a chaotic, exploitative world without falling into total despair.
Right. So let's jump right in. We start right in the mud, really, with the raw, immediate human experience of suffering. The text opens with this agonizing feeling of divine absence.
Yeah, it's very visceral.
It is. The psalmist, David, cries out, and he's basically accusing God of standing afar off and hiding his eyes during times of intense trouble.
And what's immediately striking there is how the text identifies the root cause of the earthly oppression causing that trauma. It points directly to human pride.
Human pride.
Yes. Calvin notes that the ungodly, who are inflated by this overweening conceit of themselves, they ruthlessly persecute the poor and the afflicted. He actually, he diagnoses pride as the mother of all wrongs.
Wow, the mother of all wrongs. That's a massive, sweeping diagnosis.
It really is, but it's entirely consistent with his broader theological framework. Think about just the mechanics of basic human interaction, right? If individuals didn't elevate their own worth to a pathological degree above their neighbors, just basic common humanity would kick in.
Like just recognizing that other people are human beings too.
Exactly. The inherent recognition of shared vulnerability would prevent the vast majority of the cruelty we see. But pride, well, it severs that recognition.
It cuts it off completely.
Right. It demands that the neighbor be viewed not as a fellow creature, but as expendable raw material for one's own advancement.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I have to push back a little here.
Yeah.
David is supposed to be this paragon of faith, right?
Right, the man after God's own heart.
Yeah. So yelling at God, essentially accusing him of abandoning his post and intentionally blinding himself to the suffering of the vulnerable, that feels borderline blasphemous to a lot of people. I mean, how does Calvin justify a person of faith hurling accusations like that?
It's a great question, and it forces us to address how finite human beings communicate with an infinite divine reality. Calvin introduces the concept of anthropathy here.
Anthropathy.
Yeah. It's the necessity of speaking of God in human terms, attributing physical actions or emotional states to him, so our limited minds can even begin to process our experience of his providence.
Because God doesn't have a physical body in that sense.
Exactly. God is always armed with invincible power. He doesn't possess literal eyes that can be covered with his hands, nor does he occupy physical space such that he can be, far away.
Right.
But when he permits a grievous injury to occur without immediately stepping in to vaporize the perpetrator, it translates to human senses as extreme distance.
It feels like absence.
Yes, it feels like he has actively chosen to look away.
You know, the analogy of a parent and a child navigating a difficult task comes to mind. Like, say, a child is struggling to solve a complex, frustrating puzzle, or perhaps they stumbled and scraped their knee.
Oh, sure.
They cry out, "Where are you?" feeling entirely abandoned. But the parent is actually standing quietly in the corner of the room, intensely watchful, but choosing to let the child struggle for a moment to build resilience, or maybe waiting for the precise optimal moment to intervene.
That's a perfect way to picture it.
The child's perception is total abandonment, but the reality is an intense, purposeful presence.
The perception gap between the finite and the infinite is immense. And paradoxically, the very act of complaining to God in this manner is actually evidence of profound underlying faith.
Wait, complaining is an act of faith?
Yes, because the alternative is just screaming into the void.
I see.
That's exactly the distinction Calvin makes. The alternative is indulging in what the text terms confused murmurings. It's a cynical venting to the universe with zero expectation of a resolution.
Just shouting at the sky because you're mad.
Right. But by directing his grievance specifically at God, David proves his underlying conviction that it remains God's peculiar office to administer justice.
He knows whose job it is.
Exactly. He is bringing the jurisdictional failure directly to the only judge possessing the ultimate authority to rectify it. He hasn't abandoned the concept of providence. He is agonizing over its current timeline.
He knows exactly whose courtroom he is standing in, even if the judge seems to be taking an agonizingly long time to strike the gavel.
Precisely.
And while David is experiencing this crushing sense of distance, he turns his attention to the perpetrators. There's a specific translation nuance Calvin highlights regarding the mechanics of their cruelty that paints a really vivid picture. He translates the Hebrew to read, "The poor burns in the pride of the ungodly."
Yeah, that phrasing is incredible. It depicts pride not as an inert internal character flaw, but as a devouring conflagration.
A fire.
Right. The Hebrew word dalak, it carries the meaning of persecution, but its primary literal meaning is to burn or to be inflamed.
So it's active.
Very active. The pride of the wicked is an active, consuming fire that literally incinerates the vulnerable people caught in its proximity.
Okay, so if that devouring fire is the outward manifestation, the burning of the vulnerable, what is happening inside the oppressor's mind to sustain that kind of cruelty?
Well, we have to look at their internal theology.
Because the text moves from the outward action to the internal machinery, detailing a mindset where God has been functionally removed from the equation entirely. The ungodly man praises himself, boasts of his soul's desires, and despises God.
Yeah.
And because of his pride, he simply inquireth not. All his internal devices operate on the assumption that, quote, there is no God.
The phrase desire of the soul is critical to understanding this machinery. Calvin clarifies we aren't talking about ordinary ambition or goal setting here.
Right, it's not just wanting to be successful.
No, this denotes the intemperate gratification of appetite. These individuals have overridden their internal moral compass to such a degree that they fearlessly absolve themselves of guilt. The appetite itself becomes its own justification.
They write their own moral permission slips based entirely on what they want to consume.
Exactly. And that leads to the systemic failure Calvin identifies. He says they inquireth not.
What does that mean exactly, inquiry?
Well, the foundation of any moral action, the beginning of well-doing, is inquiry. It is the conscious pause where a human being checks their raw, base impulses against a higher objective law.
Like asking yourself, is this the right thing to do?
Yes. They ask, is this just? Is this right? By skipping the inquiry phase completely, the wicked demonstrate a total refusal to assign God the prerogative of being a judge over them.
So when the text claims all their thoughts say there is no God, we aren't talking about intellectual atheism.
No.
They aren't debating the cosmological argument or writing treatises on existential nihilism.
Not at all. This is practical atheism. I mean, an individual might retain cultural religious ties, perhaps even occupying a pew on Sunday, or, referencing a higher power in public speeches.
Sure, keeping up appearances.
Right. But functionally, in the boardroom, in the courtroom, in their private dealings, they strip God of his power and his office as judge. They reduce him to a harmless, inert idol, safely locked away in the heavens, entirely unconcerned with the granular, messy affairs of human economics and power dynamics.
Let's ground this in a modern framework.
Yeah.
It's like a driver flying down a crowded highway. They are fully aware of the speed limit signs. They don't philosophically deny the existence of traffic laws or the concept of the highway patrol.
Right, they know what a speed limit is.
Exactly. But they have convinced themselves, through observation or just sheer arrogance, that the traffic cameras are permanently disabled and the police force has been entirely defunded.
So they just floor it.
Yeah. So they drive 100 miles per hour, swerving aggressively, endangering everyone around them. They aren't denying the concept of the law. They are betting their lives on the denial of its enforcement.
That's a brilliant analogy. And Calvin's theological conclusion here is chilling. He says, anyone who refuses to admit that the world is actively subject to God's providence, anyone who drives as if the cameras are permanently off, is actively doing everything in their power to put an end to the existence of God.
Wow.
Because a deity stripped of the power to govern and judge is no longer God.
They are demoting him to a retired CEO with no voting shares in the corporation.
Exactly.
But this practical atheism doesn't materialize out of nowhere, right? It requires a catalyst. I mean, if someone believes the cameras are off and they continuously speed without ever receiving a citation day after day, decade after decade, their brain undergoes a rewiring process.
They get used to it.
They become completely intoxicated by their own unbroken success.
Yes. The psychology of delayed judgment is profoundly dangerous. The text observes that the ways of the ungodly are constantly prosperous. Because they seemingly evade the common afflictions that strike the rest of humanity, they put God's judgments on high.
Meaning they ignore them.
They banish the concept of consequence to the stratosphere. They push it so far out of sight that it no longer registers as a valid threat to their daily operations.
So the arrogance inflates to a point where they believe they can obliterate their enemies with a mere puff or a breath. They say in their hearts, I shall not be moved from generation to generation.
Right. When bad actors experience continuous prosperity, when their fraudulent schemes yield massive dividends, when their health remains robust, when their power consolidates, they don't merely feel fortunate.
They feel untouchable.
Exactly. The human mind seeks patterns, and the pattern they deduce is that they possess a special exemption from human frailty. They begin to dream that the universe is bound and plighted to their success.
And Calvin references a specific historical anecdote to illustrate this psychological reinforcement, right? The tyrant Dionysus.
Dionysus of Syracuse, yes. He was a notoriously brutal ruler who committed an act of ultimate sacrilege by brazenly plundering a sacred temple.
Which is a big deal back then.
Huge. By all societal and religious expectations of the time, he should have been struck down on the spot. Instead, he boarded a ship with his plundered wealth and experienced a remarkably smooth, prosperous sea voyage.
No lightning bolts, no storm.
Nothing. And his psychological takeaway wasn't relief that he had narrowly escaped judgment. He actively boasted that the gods clearly favor the sacrilegious. The prosperity reinforced the predation.
I committed a massive crime. I profited immensely. Therefore, the universe rewards my ruthless behavior.
Exactly. It aligns perfectly with the Epicurean mindset, which Calvin notes is the default setting of the prosperous wicked.
The Epicureans, right? Remind us what they believed.
They posited that if the gods existed at all, they were confined to a state of eternal, undisturbed leisure, completely detached from the moral, chaotic workings of the earth. The prosperous oppressor adopts this theology of convenience. God is asleep, therefore I am the undisputed master of my fate.
Okay, so what does this all mean? Because we need to examine a seeming contradiction in the source text regarding that specific phrase, I shall not be moved. The wicked man uses this phrase to declare his invincibility. Yet David, the author of the text, representing the faithful, frequently uses the exact same phrase in other contexts to declare his own security.
He does.
If both the practical atheist and the faithful believer are walking around declaring, I shall not be moved, how do we differentiate the underlying mechanisms of their confidence?
It's a great observation. Calvin's dissection of this contrast gets to the very core of human dependency. It revolves entirely around the foundation upon which that confidence is built. The wicked man constructs his nest above the clouds in what Calvin terms a distempered imagination.
Distempered imagination, I like that.
He has literally forgotten his own biological and moral vulnerability.
It's the confidence of someone who has maxed out 20 different credit cards to fund a lavish, opulent lifestyle. They feel entirely secure, wealthy, and unmoved simply because the billing cycle hasn't closed and the mail hasn't arrived yet.
Yes.
The impending math is ignored in favor of the current luxury.
A perfect parallel. Now contrast that with the faithful man. He is acutely aware of the math. He knows his own accounts are empty. He recognizes that his life hangs by a single thread and, in Calvin's words, is encompassed by 1,000 deaths.
Right, he's a realist.
Extremely realistic. He lives in the harsh reality of a fallen world where sickness, financial ruin, and oppression are ever-present threats. His confidence that he shall not be moved isn't rooted in a delusion of personal invincibility. It rests entirely on his active trust in a wealthy benefactor.
He believes God's grace will sustain him.
He believes it will sustain him through the inevitable storms and catch him when he stumbles.
So the wicked man assumes he cannot be moved because he believes he's constructed of iron and stone. But the righteous man is fully aware he is made of dust, but trusts the unyielding hands holding the dust together.
That's beautifully put. That false invincibility of the wicked forces them into a state of hyperparanoia, masquerading as strength.
Oh, how so?
Well, when they are startled by the metaphorical noise of a falling leaf, they must double down on their delusion of power to numb the sudden realization of their fragility. The righteous man, when frightened, simply flees back to the sanctuary of divine providence.
So that delusion of invincibility removes all ethical friction. The inquiry phase is gone, the fear of consequences banished, and what remains is a highly calculated, uninhibited assault on the vulnerable. This brings us to the actual mechanics of their operation.
The how-to of oppression.
Right. How does this internal theology of practical atheism manifest in the real world?
The text outlines a grim operational playbook. Their mouths are described as being full of cursing, deceit, and malice, with mischief and iniquity hiding under their tongues. They sit in the ensnaring places of the villages, specifically targeting and murdering the innocent.
Now, we need to define cursing here, because modern listeners immediately equate that with profanity or, foul language.
Right, like swearing.
Yeah, but in this historical and legal context, it means the weaponization of sacred oaths.
Exactly. It is the strategic deployment of false oaths. It involves a person publicly calling down divine curses upon their own head to convince an unsuspecting victim of their absolute sincerity.
Like, may God strike me down if I am lying.
Yes. May God strike me down if I am not operating in good faith. They leverage the solemnity of an oath, the very mechanism designed to build societal trust, as a bludgeon of deception.
They weaponize the societal glue of trust to tear society apart.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the metaphors Calvin highlights to describe this predation are terrifying in their precision. They are likened to highwaymen lying in wait, dart shooters leering with half-shut eyes to carefully take aim, and lions crouching low in their dens to drag prey into nets.
It's the synthesis of these metaphors that reveals the true danger. When we hear terms like highwaymen or lions and dens, our modern minds tend to picture common street thugs or muggers in a dark alley.
Right, someone with a ski mask.
Yeah, but Calvin explicitly argues that this text is targeting great robbers. These are individuals who effectively conceal their profound wickedness under titles of honor, pomp, and splendor.
So this isn't a smash-and-grab robbery. This is systemic, white-collar predation. The pomp and splendor are the bespoke suits, the massive corner offices, the veneer of total institutional legitimacy.
Absolutely.
And the terrifying element is the combination of craft and violence. A lion doesn't roar when it's hunting. It crouches low. It feigns humility.
They approach the victim with a courteous demeanor to ensure the trap isn't telegraphed. They spread the nets of deceit first.
What do those nets look like today?
In a modern context, those nets are the intentionally convoluted legal frameworks, the impenetrable 50-page user agreements, the predatory lending structures designed to completely obscure the true cost of the transaction.
So you don't even know you're caught.
Exactly. The prey is lulled into a false sense of security by the professionalism of the predator.
You don't walk into the trap if the jaws are visible. You walk in because it looks like a legitimate opportunity for shelter or advancement. But once the signature is on the paper, once the victim is secured in the net, the feigned humility vanishes instantly, and the lion's teeth are deployed.
Calvin observes that it is practically impossible to engage with these individuals without suffering profound loss. The moment the trap springs, they leverage their systemic power to execute their will.
And they have plenty of power to leverage.
Oh, yes. They possess what Calvin calls an armed band of satellites. Lawyers, fixers, corrupt officials, ready to enact financial, reputational, or physical destruction upon the trapped individual.
Man, this is a chillingly accurate autopsy of institutional corruption. And the psychological toll this takes on a person trying to live ethically is immense. When you are surrounded by these untouchable, highly respected predators who simply never lose, the natural human reaction is a deep, suffocating despair.
Of course it is.
The practical atheism of the oppressor begins to infect the mind of the oppressed. You start looking at the x-ray of society and wondering, maybe the cameras really are off. Maybe there is no justice.
Which is the exact spiritual crisis the latter half of the text attempts to dismantle.
Right.
The narrative pivots from diagnosing the oppressor to providing an antidote for the oppressed. How do you survive the crushing weight of systemic injustice without losing your mind or your faith?
You have to actively, almost violently, fight back against the creeping narrative of divine indifference. The text sets up a stark binary here. The wicked have concluded in their hearts, God hath forgotten, he hideth his face.
That's their core belief.
But David, refusing to surrender to that narrative, commands, Arise, O Jehovah God, lift up thine hand.
The theological mechanics of that command are fascinating, really. I mean, is David attempting to awaken a sleeping deity? Does God require a motivational speech to resume his duties?
Right, like God is napping on the job.
Exactly. But Calvin notes that David is not awakening God. He is forcefully awakening himself.
He is using the command as a psychological and spiritual defibrillator on his own fainting heart.
That's a great way to put it. The human condition labors under a pervasive disease. The assumption that delayed judgment equates to divine apathy. Even the most faithful individuals are susceptible to this cognitive distortion.
Because it's just so hard to wait.
It is. The false imagination of the flesh continually suggests that God has abandoned the field. By audibly commanding God to arise, David is vigorously repelling his own internal doubts.
He's fighting his own cynicism.
Yes. He is actively pulling God down from the inactive, idle status the wicked have assigned him and mentally restoring him to the active, burning center of the judgment seat.
He is anchoring himself to the reality that God considers the mischief and the vexation. He takes the matter into his own hand, and then the text provides a specific instruction that seems almost impossibly difficult given the circumstances. It says the oppressed must leave the matter upon God.
And we have to be careful with what it means to leave it. It is not a call to passive fatalism. It is the active, deliberate transfer of jurisdiction.
Transfer of jurisdiction.
Right. It means disburdening yourself of the crushing, impossible anxiety of having to enact ultimate cosmic justice yourself. You give divine providence the necessary time to manifest its intricate designs, casting your cares into God's bosom and waiting for the fit time.
Because the promise attached to that waiting is explosive. Verse 15 uses this intense, visceral imagery. It says, break now the arm of the wicked.
In biblical poetry, the arm is the universal symbol of power and capacity. Breaking the arm means utterly shattering their ability to enact harm.
So it's not just a slap on the wrist.
No, God doesn't merely reprimand the oppressor. He dismantles their structural capacity to execute violence. And Calvin's imagery here is profoundly comforting. He argues that God can destroy their vast, complex efforts in a single moment with just a look, in the exact same manner that the rising sun easily dissipates dense, dark clouds and clears the air.
The sun doesn't wage a violent, protracted war against the fog. It simply shines, and the fog ceases to exist. The oppressive machinery of the wicked seems impenetrable and permanent to our finite eyes. But to the infinite God, it is nothing more than vapor awaiting the morning sun. Once a person realigns their perspective to this reality of unstoppable providence, their entire paradigm shifts. The temporal success of the wicked is swallowed up by the vast, eternal reign of God.
The tonal shift in the text is dramatic at this point. We move from an agonizing cry of abandonment to a declaration of supreme confidence. David says, Jehovah is king forever and ever.
Not a monarch serving a 4-year term subject to re-election, but an eternal sovereign.
And Calvin draws a sharp, necessary contrast between the divine king and human rulers. Human beings place an immense amount of hope in political saviors.
Oh, we do, constantly.
But as Psalm 146 reminds us, human princes are mortal. Their breath leaves them, they return to the dust, and on that exact day, all their grand plans and policies perish.
Even the good ones.
Even the best ones. Even a benevolent human king who genuinely desires to dismantle systemic oppression will eventually die, and his successor may instantly reverse every protective measure he instituted.
The clock is always running out on human justice.
But the eternal reign of God guarantees that a delay in assistance is never a failure of power, nor is it a sign of an expiring clock. God is not bound by mortal constraints. A delay of years or even generations does not hinder him from stretching out his hand at the precise, predetermined moment to execute justice.
And when he does stretch out that hand, the text declares that the heathen are perished out of his land. We need to examine Calvin's definition of heathen here because it fundamentally reframes the nature of the conflict. The modern assumption is that the heathen are invading forces, secular foreigners storming the gates from the outside to destroy the holy city.
Right, but Calvin's interpretation is deeply unsettling because it locates the primary threat internally.
Internally.
Yes. He identifies these heathen not as foreign invaders, but as domestic hypocrites. They are, in his words, bastard children of Abraham. These are individuals who occupy prestigious places within the bosom of the church, who claim the covenant and speak the theological language, but are entirely corrupt in their practice.
Wow. The realization that the calls are coming from inside the house.
Exactly like the horror movie trope.
The most devastating pollution, the most effective nets and snares aren't always deployed by the secular world aggressively attacking the faithful from the outside. They're deployed by hypocrites operating within sacred spaces.
It's the religious leader running a predatory financial scheme, or the elder leveraging spiritual authority to mask systemic abuse.
They claim the name of God while living as the ultimate practical atheists.
And Calvin viewed this internal hypocrisy as the most dreadful profanation of the Holy Land. We see sacred spaces continually polluted by profane, irreligious men who use titles of honor and spiritual authority as a cloak for their predatory behavior.
So what's the hope then?
The ultimate sustaining comfort of the psalmist is the assurance that God will finally and thoroughly purge his own house. He will not permit his holy temple to be permanently exposed to desecration.
There's a remarkable feedback loop described near the end of the text. It states that God hears the desire of the needy and he directs or establishes their hearts.
It is the mutual harmony of faith. God upholds the human heart internally, so will not faint or fracture under the intense pressure of waiting for justice.
While simultaneously listening to them.
Exactly. His ear is actively listening to their external cries. He inspires the initial prayer through the pressure of circumstance, sustains the individual while they wait, and ultimately executes the answer. Faith and prayer feed and sustain one another in a closed divine loop.
Which brings us to the final striking image in verse 18. God judges the fatherless and the oppressed, ensuring that the man of earth may no more terrify them. The man of earth.
It's the ultimate contrast of origins.
Because earlier, these wicked men were building their psychological nests above the clouds. They viewed themselves as untouchable, autonomous gods accountable to no one.
They breathed out terrible threatenings as if they possessed the authority to rule the sky. But the text violently grounds them. It reminds us of their actual composition. They are merely men of earth.
Just dirt.
Literally. Calvin describes them as having crept out of the crevices of the ground. Despite the vast accumulation of wealth, the intimidating legal frameworks, and the roaring arrogance, they remain fragile. Mortal creatures constructed of dirt, attempting to launch an assault against the eternal God of heaven.
A completely futile endeavor when viewed through the lens of eternity. The God of heaven will inevitably put the man of earth back into the dirt. That is the foundational assurance that allows a person to endure the excruciating delay of justice without abandoning their faith or succumbing to cynical despair. We have covered immense ground today. We started in the mud of human trauma, acknowledging the visceral agony of God's perceived absence. We mapped the internal psychology of the prosperous oppressor, exploring how unchecked success builds a delusion of invincibility that manifests as practical atheism.
The ones driving 100 miles an hour.
Exactly. We laid out their playbook of weaponized trust and systemic predation. And ultimately, we discovered how to fight back by actively reclaiming a cosmic perspective, trusting that God's eternal sovereign providence will eventually shatter the illusions of the wicked and purge the hypocrisy from his own house.
It's a framework that refuses to deny the overwhelming reality of present darkness, yet absolutely refuses to grant that darkness the final word in human history.
As we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with a concept to turn over in your mind. We explored how the delay of justice operates as a catalyst. For the wicked, the delay convinces them the cameras are off, emboldening them to drop their masks and fully indulge their predatory nature.
Yeah.
For the righteous, the delay creates intense pressure, forcing them to dig beneath superficial belief and anchor their faith in the bedrock of God's character. So what is the delay in justice? The very tension that causes us the most agony, the thing that makes us scream, "Why are you standing afar off?" is not a malfunction of the universe? What if that delay is the exact necessary mechanism designed by a sovereign God to fully expose what is truly hidden in the deepest recesses of every human heart? Think on that for a while. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Calvin's commentary on Psalm 10. Keep inquiring, refuse the illusions of the present moment, and we will see you next time on Reformed Thinking.